Nobody is coming to save you. People who work for companies where they feel like the environment is so chaotic and disorganized.
Yep.
I never know what's going on. Things are always changing. People are coming and going. Everyone kind of all over the place.
There's a difference between it is a challenging time and it's a chaotic time. Chaos is we have no idea where we're going, but we're throwing the kitchen sink at you.
Fuck your self-development.
I'm sure it will work.
And now...
Coordinated, beautiful. Welcome back.
Ready to rock and roll. Conversations and messages that I get a lot on social media are people who work for companies where they feel like the environment is so chaotic and disorganized.
Yep.
I never know what's going on. Things are always changing. People are coming and going. Everyone kind of all over the place. And I don't really know how to deal with it. And I find it interesting because like one thing I notice is that a lot of people experience that, but they don't leave.
Yeah.
So they're frustrated by it. Likelihood it's going to change anytime in the near future is super slim. So you're working for a company where the writing is on the wall, babe.
Yes. 100%.
And you don't want to read it. And then the other side of it is like, it seems like a very common theme across multiple companies and businesses and brands.
Sizes, cultures.
Globally.
Yes.
I get messages from people in Australia, in Singapore, all over the world who experience this. So starting with like, what are the dysfunctions that show up that like create a chaotic workplace environment? What are the things that start to influence it? And then how does that like have a downstream impact on the team members?
I think it starts with unclear direction. And when I look at what you just said, what people have a hard time delineating, and I think, again, this goes to the communication concepts we talk about, is there's a difference between it is a challenging time and it's a chaotic time. And because it's unclear where we're going, more times than not, it's actually chaos, right? Challenging is, hey, we're making this change. It's going to be uncomfortable. There are things we're going to have to learn. There's things that are going to be different. Yet we're aware of where we're going. Chaos is we have no idea where we're going, but we're throwing the kitchen sink at you to figure out how to fix the problem at hand that we don't even know, haven't yet clearly identified. So when you say that, the thought that comes to my mind is it's unclear where you're trying to go. And that I find for some people is like where they're not sure, is it chaotic or challenging? When I think about what you just said, I'd also be curious to ask those people, like, what is the reason it feels chaotic, right? Or what is the reason it feels dysfunctional? It may just be that, hey, you guys have no idea why you're doing the things or making the changes that you are, so you have no clear direction.
Yeah. I have an interesting perspective simply from conversations in the comment section, etc. A lot of what seems to be expressed around chaos in the workplace is dealing with leadership and management that is just all over the place. 1 minute we're doing this, the next minute you're doing that. Hey, why are you still working on this project? Like, there's so much put on the team. And it's constantly changing, so you never feel like you're gaining any forward momentum in one direction without something being ripped out from underneath you, and then like you're shoved in the opposite direction. So it seems that some of the expression around the chaos is, I never know what my boss, manager, or leader wants. I'm doing the best I can, but it's always fucking changing.
Yes.
And there is no consistency whatsoever.
Yeah. So there's unclear direction, and then it goes into the second big thing, which is when there's not clear direction, the communication is putrid. There's no communication that, and I've heard friends of mine say this, but kind of you triggered a thought. The communication doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand. So we have no idea why things are playing out the way they are and what's being told to us versus, again, it's the idea of actions and words don't line up. The communication bit is the disconnect. So if you're unclear, there's a high likelihood that the downstream secondary thing is, I have no idea what you're trying to tell me or why we're trying to do this. What are you trying to get me to understand?
So, question about that. Downstream communication is poor.
Yep.
we're unclear in our direction. Okay. I have two trains of thought. One, is a company perhaps clear on where they want to go and what they're trying to do, but they're not communicating it to the team
Yes.
for whatever reason? That could be maybe you don't want to be as transparent as you need to and as open and honest. Or you're trying to see like which way something shakes out. And then your communication downstream is like there's gaps and holes in what you're doing because you're omitting things and leaving stuff out. So it seems clunky and it doesn't make sense.
I think the larger the company, the more context you need. And I find the larger the company at times, because you need more context, because there are more parts, so much communication gets missed, right? So I'll think of it through this lens. If we're a small business and I work for a small company, it's really not hard to make sure that communication is cohesive. It maybe goes through 5 to 50 people if you work in a small business. If you work for a large company, there are so many layers of bureaucracy that it gets filtered through, that from where it starts to where it's received and like the rubber meets the road, as you would say, or boots on the ground conversation, there's just fundamentally too many filters it's gone through. And I think what happens is by the time it gets through all of the filters, it's like, I don't even know like the best way to create an analogy around it, but it's like it started as an egg. We got left with the yolk.
I have an analogy.
Yeah.
It's the telephone game that you play in school. You get everybody to sit in a big circle. The word's banana. You say it to the next person. By the time it makes its way back and it's said to the first. Yeah.
Bah. See you later. Yeah.
It's Chinese. It's not even English.
There you go.
And it gets so distorted from each person that it gets passed around to.
Yes. And I find, and again, this is a communication thing. You also find out very quickly how effective people are at communication. Like we talk about leadership, right? There's this then indicates like effective communication is low. If it goes through one filter and you miss the message, it's a very much a personnel issue. If it goes through 2 or 3 or 4 filters and it gets completely fucked up, it's a culture problem. So when you're asking that to me, it's like, I think a smaller company has an easier time. I think it then becomes imperative. The larger the business is, the simpler and better the communication is passed through. It's also the reason, separate topic, but I will say this. I don't think very, 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 very multi-layered organizations work well over time. I think that's why you see the trends you do in startup culture in Silicon Valley now, where it's like NVIDIA, for example, everybody reports to the CEO. There's not this person reports this person to this person to this person. It's like all 19 of these people come to you. That's it. There's no multi-layer, and I think in some ways that's a beautiful thing from a communication standpoint, because there's no way it's hard to fuck it up when you talk directly to the head honcho or the person in charge, regardless of what department you're in.
Yeah. At that point, if you do, you're not listening.
Yeah, 100%.
To what is being communicated.
Yeah. I also think part of what happens too is, so we're unclear on direction. We are shitty at communicating. And so I think downstream, like you're talking about the telephone game when you're a kid, then all of a sudden the conversation becomes, okay, so what do we need to do, right? So what are the tasks? And if those first 2 filters unfold, the third one is, okay, now we have to figure out how to do the task, because like we don't really know what we're trying to do. It's not being communicated well, but we have to do something, right? Like that's the thesis that someone on the team will think. Then you don't even know what to focus on or what to do. And I think what that does is, when the communication filters are not exceedingly clear, it makes it so difficult to prioritize. What project matters, what doesn't. In a snap of a finger, it's like, is what I was doing useful? Am I putting it to the side? Am I only doing this? Like, and I don't know what your comment sections have looked like, but that would be my curiosity, is like, what happens? Do people have a hard time prioritizing?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that's been expressed is I will be working on a project and then all of a sudden I am given something else,
Yep.
but I don't actually know which one is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have fear.
It cut. Go ahead. You're good.
Fear of communicating with the manager and leader to identify like what is priority.
Yeah.
Because it just feels chaotic. It's like, this is changing all the time. There's no consistency with this. I start getting into momentum on something, then this is thrown on my plate. My manager is what I perceive to be as neurotic as fuck and all over the place. And I also think when you perceive somebody to be neurotic and all over the place, you don't really look to them for stability
Yes.
and consistency. So if the very person that is supposed to be in charge is haywire the majority of the time and is constantly like shifting
All over the place,
gears, then how do I even approach a conversation with this person?
Yes.
So I think whoever's listening to this, if you work at a company that is chaotic and it does feel dysfunctional and you don't really know what to do, I can understand and empathize why you wouldn't maybe want to have that conversation with like a manager or somebody in a leadership role. But you are very much perpetuating it by not being willing to have that conversation.
100%.
So is the fear maybe valid? Sure. Is you ignoring it and not having a conversation about it a responsible thing to do, regardless of like where you work and the level you are in a company? Like probably not. And I think you have to decide for yourself through those conversations, is this a place that you want to stay at?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. There's the other thought that comes to my mind is, why do you stay if it's a consistent thing? What do you get out of being in an environment that's consistent? And the biggest thing there is, are you, like you said, are you perpetuating it? Have you spoken up? Are you willing to change? 100%. And the other part that, and I think the thing that kind of spawns off of this that's hard, and we've talked about reputation before, is, okay, so we've gone through 3 filters. We've gone through, there's no clear direction, the communication's awful. Now we don't know what to prioritize. So then the quality of the work goes down. And if I'm on a team and those 3 are the filters that just happened, and then I go to do the work and it's not good, it's not helping the outcomes, nothing's moving forward. A lot of times what we do is we're like, oh, it's management's fault. And it's like, yes, it is. Like I'm happy to make management responsible. Equally, you still did the work and it ended up being low quality. And that is not a fun experience, to do something that comes out low quality because you, like I said, like we were talking about, the 3 steps that led to, hey, this sucks. This isn't good. And I don't think it's always because what you did was bad or intended for to be shit. It's just all of these steps before this were lacking. And so by the time we got to, okay, now you have to do something, and you misprioritized, it might be good based on other priorities, but based on what was meant to be the priorities, this is quite literally shit. I'm sure you've experienced that, where you misprioritized something. The work you created was shit, not because it was shit, but based on what the priorities were. It had no utility for you.
I think people, I've said it before, and I will probably say it on so many episodes, I think people want to do good work and they want to do meaningful work.
Yes.
And they want to spend their time on shit that actually matters to them and whatever it is they're contributing to. Now, sure, there's a camp of people that like the apathy just fucking seeps out of them. And like, that's your own shit to sort out. And like, you hang out over there. But for the majority of the people, we want to like leave work and feel fulfilled, like we did something meaningful today and we contributed. Nobody wants to go to work for 8 to 10, 12 hours a day and come home and be like, what a waste of half a day. I just sat on my ass and twiddled my thumbs and did work that I don't even admire myself for creating. And don't believe that we are hardwired as people to show up and exist in that way. I also think, with that being said, it takes a great deal of courage to go to somebody on a team who is your manager, supervisor, leader, and say, I feel like I am falling short and I'm not satisfied with the work that I'm doing because there is so much shifting of gears all the
Yes.
time. So what is the priority? What do you need from me? And how do we define success? Because I'm having this conversation on my own behalf that this isn't good enough for me. And oftentimes we don't do that. We wait for somebody to,
Tell us.
well, they never said anything
Yes.
to me and it never came up. It's like, cool. I'm not here to argue that. Like, they should have done that. Also, you have your own fucking autonomy as a person. If you don't like it for you, why are you not having a conversation about it?
Why do you think people do that though?
Oh, because I think people want to outsource responsibility. I think it is so much easier to look at someone else and be like, this is your fault. It's not my fault.
Yeah.
And it takes no courage to do that. I think it's extremely vulnerable and uncomfortable to say, these are my standards and this isn't being met. And this is what I want. And I'm willing to vocalize that. Like, just the courage to say, like, this is falling short of my standard and put your name on that and be willing to own it. It takes an immense amount of courage. So I think that's number one. I think we have no skill in being able to
Be human.
yeah, and share that and be like, this isn't good enough for me.
Yes.
What can I do about it moving forward? Who's the person I maybe need to have this conversation with to get a piece of the puzzle that I can work with and then take this and improve it? And I think people love to outsource responsibility. You see it all the time with people. You give them an opportunity to make a decision, and then they're like, well, what would you do? Of course you would love to know that, because then you don't have to make your own decision. Hey, here's an opportunity for you. I will use an example like with hiring somebody. Let's say you have a manager on a team. They need to hire somebody for their department. Cool. You sit down. You're helping them interview somebody. You have 5 candidates. You ask the manager, which one would you like to hire? Which one do you want to choose? And they don't want to give you an answer. And they don't want to give you an answer because they don't want to assume the responsibility of making the decision and having to own the fact that they went through a decision-making process.
Yes.
And then what happens if I made the wrong decision? So I would rather outsource this to somebody else. And because most individuals have such a low tolerance for what they perceive as confrontation or letting somebody down, they say, no issues. I think you should hire person number 4. And you all fucked up. And none of you wanted to be responsible in your own way. So if it takes immense courage and vulnerability to share and say, hey, this is falling short of my standard, that's number 1. The second one is like, we want to outsource responsibility. And number 3, most of us can't handle what we perceive to be as rejection. If I go to you and say, hey, I feel like I'm falling short, that potentially makes me look stupid.
Yes.
It puts a target on my back that I'm not meeting the standard or expectation, even though the standard is like non-existent in the environment that you're in. And what if I go and I express this to somebody and they just like don't meet me in a way that is receptive and helpful? They either belittle my statement, they withdraw from me, or I put myself in a position where this person's like, oh, well, you openly admitted that you don't think you're doing a good job. So there's like fear of that and fear of repercussion. So we don't do it. And then we sit on our hands and we wait for somebody to lead the way. But then we're fucking miserable because we're not leading our own life. But then we gladly bitch in the comment section of an Instagram post that like, yeah, fuck the leadership. Fuck your self-development. Lack of leadership.
Lack of agency to make yourself a better person.
You are also a leader of your own life. You just don't have a title.
That creates its own conversation. It's a whole separate thing. Why do you need a title?
I don't think people do. But I think it's easier if people want to categorize themselves. Well, I'm not a manager, or I'm not a business owner, or like I'm not in a leadership role.
I'm not an executive.
So,
I'm not a VP. I'm not an accountant, whatever. It's like, okay. And?
Are you a father? Are you a mother? Are you a friend?
Are you a person?
Are you a community member? Like,
Does your heart beat? Have you tried trying harder?
lead your life, man.
Yeah.
But again, it's like we tolerate so much and we complain. It's like, well, I don't like this. And the company's all over the place. And the communication is shit. And I feel like things are like always shifting all the time. And it's like, okay, cool. Have you ever like had a real conversation with somebody? I also think sometimes people don't even realize how chaotic they're being until somebody points it out.
Yes.
And not in a way that is combative or aggressive. Another camp of people that I often hear from is like, well, I did point something out and then I ended up getting fired. And my question is, well, how did you do it?
Yeah, 100%.
So you go to your significant other and you're like, hey, I'd like to spend more time with you. I miss you. I feel like we haven't really got to connect that much. And it's like, I asked them for more time and then they dumped me. I was like, okay, well, how'd you have that conversation?
You fucking don't love me. You didn't see me. You should have. Oh my God. People will should their way to fucking hell.
Totally.
Jesus Christ.
But then you don't get the outcome you're looking for. But you said, I expressed myself. Okay, but how? What was the approach in which you took?
We can have a whole relationship conversation at some point. Oh, fuck. That's...
But it shows up so much in work. And then we tolerate it. So like you said, it's like the misprioritization, but you do nothing to reprioritize it for yourself. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening to this and you're just like, well, fuck, that's me, and you would like to make a new choice.
There's space to make a new choice.
Have a conversation. I noticed this. I feel like I'm falling short here. This matters to me. This isn't living up to my standard of how I want to operate in my role.
Yes.
Can I get clarity on what is the priority?
Yes.
How do we define success? I would like to get better and I would like to improve. Because if you approach somebody through that lens, especially like as somebody who is in a leadership role and is a business owner, I'm like fucking Johnny on it. Like, I'd be like, oh my God, 1,000 apologies that there was a lack of clarity and this has been so difficult for you. Give me the next little bit. Let me clarify this. Let's figure this out. And if it comes up again, like, check me. And I'm willing to work on you or work on this with you, right? If you approach somebody and they don't respond that way and they become defensive, passive aggressive, and disconnect, like, you have your answer. Like, start working on your resume and find a different job.
Yes.
Like, that's so black and white at that point. Yeah. But don't continue to, like, perpetuate it and wallow in it.
Yeah.
Nobody is coming to save you.
Nobody. So I think as you kind of were elaborating, I was like, man, we talked about direction, like not being clear. You're talking about lack of communication, not being able to prioritize. The work output starts to be low quality, and nobody wants to have the conversation about why it's low quality. When you think about the compounded effect of all of those things, it becomes very easy to see the overarching theme of all of those things compounding, which is distress and burnout.
Yeah.
When people use those terms, they are not actually... When people say that to me, I'm like, I don't think you're burnt out. You're probably distressed. The reason the distress is so bad is basically what you just laid out in the process. It's like there is a series of things that are happening before you got to this point of I'm burnt out or or this organization is distressed. And it's a very... When you make people aware of that, it's a very terrifying thing to realize that all of it was avoidable. Like, we took the time, we just broke it down. It's like, okay, get clear is step 1. Communicate that effectively is step 2. 3, prioritize. 4, do good quality work based on 1 through 3. I can promise you never get to 5. If that 4-step process, but the 5th thing that will happen is this place fucking sucks and I'm tired. And I'm burnt out, and I'm going on a sabbatical. Yeah. I'm often curious, and I'd love your perspective on this because we've talked about it off of this. But how often do you think people really get into burnout because they're burnt out, or how often do they get to burnout because of what we just kind of broke down, where it's like, hey, here's this 4-step process? Because I think there's a difference between burning out because you really fucking worked too hard, and burnout of holy fuck, there's all of this lack of order, for a better term, that leads to it? How often do you think it's that, rather than, hey, you just worked your ass off and you need a break?
I think it's more so number one. Like all these things weren't in place or they weren't addressed, and now you're very tired. I also think, and we've talked about this before, if you're doing it at work, you're doing it in other areas of your life, and then everything is just exacerbated. So, of course, it feels intolerable. But work is the one place that you allocate the most amount of hours clocked because you need resources, which are finances, and you don't really get to avoid it.
Yeah.
Unless you just bow the fuck out and you're going to be a bum and a hippie. And you can be a hippie and still make good money. I'm not being an asshole. I'm kind of a hippie. But yeah, like I think we blame work. But you spend the majority of your waking hours at work.
It's like half your life.
Yeah. So you do the same shit in your personal life that you do at work. If you're avoiding these conversations in your career, you're probably avoiding them with friends, family, significant other, whatever else is going on with you. But it feels like it shows up the most at work. And then you come home and you're tired from your job, and then you walk through the door, your significant other has an issue with you, and you're like, I can't get away from this. So like what you're tired of is yourself. But I'm going to blame it on
everything else,
on my workplace. And then I do think, here's where I think burnout like actually happens. And I'm curious your take on this, because I feel in some ways I experienced it. I was burned out from at one point in my life from my own like patterns of exactly that. Like my business is the same as my personal life. Like it's all a fucking shit show. Cool. I was just fatigued and exhausted from living that way. But then I had to clean it up.
Yes.
And then that was where a true level of work and like consistent output and probably in a lot of ways went into overdrive to clean it up. And when that phase was done, I think I was legitimately like, I need a fucking break and I'm exhausted. So I think you almost get a double whammy because
I think that can be true to a degree.
You're tired, you're fatigued, and depending on your life and like what you have to clean up, right? Like if you're a business owner who's listening to this, you have like a whole different fucking ball game of work that's going to come with it compared to just like I clock in, I clock out. I need to like tighten up some boundaries in my workplace. Then I think you get hit with it. You're first fatigued from yourself. And then when you go to truly make a massive change in your life, it does take an immense amount of work while you're sorting through that.
I think it's two things. So like I'm very familiar with what you went through because I was there for the most recent one a couple years ago. I think it becomes two things. I think you get to a place where you're like, holy fuck, this is all fucking discombobulated. It's fucked and whatever. And I'll use this specific to you, but I think a lot of people who are listening can relate to this. You worked so hard, so much, purely, like for lack of a better term, purely on vibes. And like, I love people with passionate energy. I love people who are driven. One of the things that we don't do, and it doesn't mean this is where I think the corporate world gets it wrong. It doesn't mean you need to have a bunch of meetings. One of the things that people do not do with themselves and also don't do in business environments is pause and check in. That doesn't mean you need a 45-minute, 16-person meeting. It can literally be as simple as like conversations amongst teammates, conversations among management with team, etc. It can be an active process. What happens to a lot of people, which you experience, which is when you go to clean up and you experience this, you in very similar ways during cleanup operated from the same space of like, I'm going to go on, like I see everything I have to fix, but I'm going to fix it on the same type of vibe, which is like, I'm just going to bum rush that shit. Right. And then when you get done with cleaning it up, here's the best part. And you're aware of this in hindsight. You actually set up for another mess. It took a little longer for that mess to clean up because you might have addressed foundational issues. But lo and behold, the next mess was going to come. So the cycle became, to some degree, like clean up the mess, create the mess, clean up the mess. But while cleaning up that mess, didn't I didn't think far enough ahead. And I think for a lot of people, we don't take the time to pause. I don't remember if it was Albert Einstein or somebody, but the quote goes something like, I'll take 55 minutes to think on a problem and solve it. Take 5 minutes to do the work and solve it. And while I don't think that that's always the answer, because I just don't think that's the way the world always works, there is something to be said for creating the space to pause. It doesn't matter if it's your work. It doesn't matter if it's in your relationship. It doesn't matter if it's with yourself, your health, whatever it is. Your biggest bits of wisdom come in the pause. They don't often come while you're in execution. And when you are so good at pausing and you're so good at executing, you will be able to make changes on the fly. I'm going to use an example that is probably more relatable to anybody listening who's gone through the health side of stuff. It is really easy to make an adjustment as to what you need to do on the fly to get in the shape you want to get to when you've done the exercise hundreds of thousands of times, you've dieted hundreds of thousands of times, and you understand your lifestyle and how to integrate it hundreds of thousands of times. So you can, on the whim, on the fly, make the change, and that subtle nuance and awareness can happen faster. When you start, you have to work. Once you get to a certain point with the work, you have to learn how to pause while you're working so you don't keep beating your head into a wall. Then as you move forward, you start to make the distinctions, and you can make the slight change as you're going rather than having to start, pause, start, pause, start, pause. Like there's a healthy mix of that. I think most people especially earlier in their careers, and part of the reason I think sometimes people aren't able to like move their way through or up the ladder, for lack of a better term, is because they don't learn that skill. It's not just work hard. If the answer was just work hard, you'd be a construction worker. And that's not a slight to construction workers, but it's like you could just beat a nail with a hammer, beat a nail with a hammer. If it was just about thinking, you can go be a philosopher or some shit in the West Indies. That's cool too. And like that's a life for some people, but that's not your ability to evolve over time is a combination of the two. And I find for a lot of people, they will oscillate between the two, and the dance is actually somewhere in the middle. And you have to learn quickly based on the constraints of an environment. Do I need to be more in pause and think, or do I need to spend more time in act and execute? And so when it comes to the burnout thing that you're asking, I think it's because we are terrible at being like, okay, put the foot on the gas, and like it's on a straight line, and that's okay. And maybe the tire will get a little bumpy, but like we're on a straight line and the foundation is there. On the other end, some of us will be like, can I put my foot on the gas? Is the tire where it's belonged to? Does the steering wheel work? Like, it's like there. So I think with the burnout thing, it's for a lot of people, and I've seen it with you, the lesson becomes learning the dance between, yes, work fast, work hard, and pause and think, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then your capacity to make faster decisions that when you put the foot on the gas, move you further, quicker, is better. But it's a dance. And I find for most people, they fall in one extreme. You're crippled by questions and thought, or you're exhausted by doing too much and never thinking and giving yourself the space to be like, oh, there might be a better way to do this.
For somebody who's listening to this, who is in a chaotic environment in their workplace, probably the direction is unclear of what the management and leadership wants. There's poor communication around it. So your priorities are all over the fucking place. Feels like they're constantly changing. Your quality of work is suffering. You might be at the place where you're tired. You feel tired about it and you're anxious. You're now at the part of the process where you probably don't really trust the company. And depending on how shoddy your work is and for how long, the company also might not trust you.
It's a fuck situation. It's a real fuck situation.
So it's both and, because yes, even though the company is chaotic and dysfunctional, if your work has also suffered because you haven't spoke up, or you've been unreliable, or like you've missed deadlines and things have been all over the place, trust is breaking on both ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And both parties are at fault. And there's a responsibility for like both the company
and the
person who's working there. So, which is a bit of a mind fuck for somebody listening. Yes. Responsibility, collective responsibility.
Yeah, we're all contributing.
What can you do? Like, what is the path forward?
If you're in the fucked situation,
yeah, like I'm the team member.
I think the best thing you can realize is if you're at that level of fucked, I think the best thing you can do is look inward and be like, how can I get ahead of this never happening again? And I say that because it's one thing to mess up based on you were curious and you're just learning, but you didn't know, like you didn't have the skill set yet. It's a whole different thing to let it go and perpetuate as long as it is. So it's liken it to a relationship. If I say something to you and I had no awareness that framing something like that might upset you, trigger you, whatever, cool, I'm human. You're not going to burn my eyebrows off. If you have repeatedly told me that you are not to be communicated like that and you don't like it, and I just keep doing it haphazardly, that is a problem. I am the one who's responsible. It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Right? Like that adage actually plays out pretty true over the course of time. And then if you fool me more than that, like, fuck it. Like, what are you doing? Like, now it's kind of like, what is going on here? So I think for those people, if you have gotten to that extreme, it's really time, a moment to look in the mirror. And it's one of two things you discern. I stayed somewhere, it's no different than a relationship. I stayed somewhere too long, and my time to go was a long time ago, and I didn't leave. That's my fault. Or I am not being who I say I am, and executing the way I can, and that's also my fault. That is the granular. It's one or the other, or it's a combination of the both, and it's and in a way, right? I find a lot of people are not gonna want to admit that, and the funny part is when you reconcile at that level, it's so easy to be at peace and solve problems faster. Hey, if it's been clear to me for months that this isn't going to be the place, it's my responsibility to execute best I can and then make decisions I need to move on. If I'm slipping up and there's opportunity for me to get better, I will get better, and I will not tolerate going backwards where I can. There are some things that I can't control. That's how business works, and I have the opportunity to change. And I think for a lot of people listening, when we realize we have agency and we can be responsible, a lot of these things stop happening. Because remember, at the end of the day, you may work for a company, but at the end of the day, it's called employment at will, legally. You chose to be there. You are going to live with the consequences and the constraints. So you have to figure it out. And I do think there's a responsibility, but remember, like, you showed up. You chose to be there. So if you are an active participant, and this is a life lesson, you are an active participant in your life. Be responsible for how you actively participate, which is why our group chat is called Active Participation. So if you show up, you show up. And if you don't, then can't help you. So.
Yeah, I'll wrap up with this. I think a lot of us forget along the way that we have the freedom to choose, but we are not free from the consequences of our choices.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same breath of that, part of the freedom to choose is like, you get to do it the way you want to.
Yes.
Like, it doesn't have to default into this, like, everything is a consequence in a negative way, and just let life throw at you whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You get to wake up and decide how you want to build your life and your career and spend your time.
How you show up in society and for the life that you live. Yeah, 100%.
Willful employment. We're just going to wrap her up there.
We're going to do a legal episode so people understand how the legal aspect of this works.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap. Like, subscribe, tell your friends. Leave us a review.
Tell us what we can do better, what you want us to talk about.
Actively participate in telling us where we have areas of improvement.
Yeah. We're asking you for it.
100%.